everybody, I am Lissie and I am going to show you guys how to do a fun watercolor project today for our Family Strengths Kids Paint Series. These are a couple of finished versions. This is mine and this is my 5-year-old. So you notice there's not a lot of difference. So this is a project that almost anybody can do. It definitely helps to have a little bit of parent help for the start. Especially for the taping. The first thing that I want everybody to do is use their masking tape. And you should have a cup of water to wash your paintbrushes in, and a grocery bag, or you can, if you need to, use the plastic bag that the supplies came in. But we're going to get paint on them, so if you want to put a paint back into the bag, maybe grab a Smith's bag. And those are the only things that you need that weren't in your kits. So to start with, we're going to tape down our picture. You can see that I already have one, or paper. I already have one taped down here. The thing that's different than just straight up taping it down that I like to do is I like to peel the tape and then stick it to my jeans or pants or whatever and pull it off. So you'll get a little bit of the fuzz from your clothes on there, and that keeps it from tearing your paper. It makes it just a little bit less sticky. So it still does what it needs to do, but it's not so sticky that you won't, that it'll tear the paper when you pull it off after we're done. And then after you tape down the outside edges of your paper, which help your paper not become super wrinkly as it gets wet with the watercolor, the next thing you're going to do is tape off some sections. You can do it like I've got these guys. I did one across and then did some across the other direction. My little guy just did all sorts of different directions. And then in this one, we have kind of a star pattern going here. So you can tape it however you want. You just want about 8 different sections, somewhere in that vicinity. I'm taking over this one that my big kid did and ended up not wanting to finish. So we are going to do, each of these sections is going to have a different watercolor technique. And a technique is just a way of making it look different. So I'm going to start with some red paint. The cool thing about watercolor trays is that we've got your basic colors here in the tray, but if you put them out here, and just make sure to always wash your brush in between and keep your colors really nice and clean. But then say I wanted to make this into color. Wash my brush really good, and then I go into the orange, and the lid of the paint tray becomes a mixing tray. I can mix my colors right there. So now I've got kind of a red-orange color. My next for this box over here. So I am going to start filling it up. And we want to make sure, for most of these techniques, you want to make sure that you're using a good bit of water. If it's dry, you're not gonna, the techniques aren't gonna show up as well. So you want to make sure that you use enough water and enough paint that the techniques will show up. I'm using a mix of my orange color I mixed and red and orange. Sorry if it's jumpy. I have little kids popping in and out, so I'm pausing the recording. I have a wet paint here, and now I'm going to do my first technique, which is salt. You have 2 different kinds of salt in your kit in little containers like this. One is just regular table salt, and one is larger flake salt. I'm going to start with just the regular table salt for this one, and sprinkle that on, and then you just let it dry. You want to make sure that there's enough wetness that you can actually see how when you get really close to it there, you can see that the salt kind of pulls the paint toward it, so that when it dries, you get kind of feathery, snowflakey look. That's where Salt was on Trevor's picture. So be sure to leave your salt on until it dries, or else it's not really going to do anything. And I'm going to pause and I'll be right back in just a few minutes. Now I'm going to do the other salt variety we have, which is the flake salt. I'm going to do that in a different set of colors. I'm going to do some purples and some blues. And you do exactly the same thing. You just paint and make sure that it's fairly wet so that your salt has paint to grab onto. And remember to wash your brush in between colors. Maybe I'll be super crazy and throw a little bit of this red orange on the edge to make it interesting. See what happens when that turned into brown. It's kind of a neat bluish brown though. All right, so I've got my wet paint there, and I'm gonna sprinkle the salt. My salt is a little different than what you guys have because I ran out. These are bigger pieces of salt, so it will still do the same kind of thing. All right, so there are the first two sections. Next, we're going to use bubble wrap. Seems super silly. We're going to use bubble wrap. So again, the first thing you do is cover your area. You can do a solid color. You can do a mix of colors. You can do just about anything you want. But again, you have to make sure that there's a good bit of paint on there so that there's something for the bubble wrap to grab onto. I'm going to do blues and greens. Kind of mix them. So I've got some interesting colors happening. And if you have a lot of color, but you don't have enough water, you can always just dip your brush in water and go back in there and add a little more water. So now that that's nice and full paint, you guys have two different sizes of bubble wrap. I'm going to start with this big guy here, and I'm going to do just on one side. You stick it down, the bubbly side down, and when you lift it up, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it made some funky texture, and I'm going to do a little garbage. Stick it down, and you pull it up. You've got little dots, and as it dries, it's going to look a little different. This is Trevor's regular bubble wrap. I think this is my regular bubble wrap, and this is the big bubble wrap here. It didn't do very much at all, but it just gives it kind of a different texture. All right, now I'm going to and that's same, pretty close to the exact same thing we've done on all these other ones. Let's lay on a good bit of paint. Purple and some red. And mix these two together and get a really neat red violet kind of color. In here. And for this one, I like to have a whole lot of color, a lot of paint. So go back and add more. Okay, so we've got a nice and intense color. Take the grocery bag and just sort of crinkle it up. Lay it on there kind of crinkled. Squish it down flat. And when you pull it up, you'll be able to see where the crinkles were. Cool. And it'll dry with the crinkles showing. All right, so the next one. The next one I have is going to be one that, well, these techniques we're going to use in the other projects that we have. So I'm going to do a rainbow and make it go all the way across from one color all the way across the rainbow. So I'm going to show you guys how to do some really easy blending, because one of the projects we're going to do is a blended colorful sky. And so we'll start with one color and blend across to the others. So what I like to do is start with my color and go pretty dark with that color, then leave a little gap in between and put in my next color. And then with a clean brush with some water on it, it's not drippy, but wet, we kind of go in between the two colors. And we'll take it from the green to the yellow. And then clean wet brush in between blue and green. Keep doing the same thing all the way through the rainbow. I may run out of rainbow. I may not have room for my orange, but that's okay. Same thing, wet brush, blend, blend, blend. Red. If you want to, you can go back and make your colors more intense and then kind of blend again the same way. So I like them kind of faded out like this. The next one I'm going to do is called wet on wet. So the first thing you do, make sure your water is not super murky or else it's going to color your paper. You're going to fill up this entire section with water. You don't want it to be a pool, but you want it to definitely be wet. This is part of why we taped down our paper, because with getting the paper this wet, it likes to wrinkle. And the tape will help it stay fairly flat. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my little pointy brush. You guys should have 3 brushes, one that came with the watercolors, and a little pointy one and a flat one. Now I'm going to pick some colors. Start with it's really close so you can see what it's doing. As I paint on the wet, even though I'm making a little line, the paint spreads around and blends. And if you do another color, right across it or next to it, it'll blend. And because of that wet paper, it's bleeding and not staying exactly where you put it. So it does some neat feathery effects, especially, look at that, that was cool. So So you can do all sorts of neat things. I'm just doing squiggly lines, but you could use this to do feathers if you wanted to paint a bird. You can use it for like blending colors on flowers. You can use it for just about anything. I just like making fun squiggles that blend into each other. All right, so that's the wet on that. Oh, that's enough. Sorry, I'm trying to get the hang of this recording from two places. All right, so wax resist is the next one. I'm going to find the white crayon. All right, so you should have a white crayon in the bag. Doesn't matter if you're starting with the point or the end. I've got a broken one, so I'm just gonna draw in this section. I'm gonna draw fairly heavy for it to be really effective. And you can't see it super great because it's white crayon on white paper, but you can see it some. And I am just making some lines, but you could do words, you could draw a picture, you could do all sorts of things. I'm just going for showing you what different techniques look like. So now I'm going to get a pretty dark, intense paint on my brush and come and paint over. And because wax keeps water from absorbing, and this paint is a water-based paint, it's not going to absorb where I did my lines. So that keeps that area. White. And then after it dries, if I want to, you can see kind of some little beaded up watercolor on top of the wax. I could wipe that off, or like right now, I could use paper towel, which I don't seem to have handy. Here's a rag. And if I clear that off, then I'll have just my white lines. And I have a green box that was already painted before I started for my big kid. That's most of the techniques. What else did we do? Oh, I did both of the bubble wraps together, and that's why I have an extra box. So I'm gonna go back in here and paint it darker, and I'll do the big bubble wrap. Let's see if we can make it look a little different. See the big bubbles a little bit. So now I am all finished. I've used all these techniques. I'm gonna let my picture dry before I take off the tape. If you do it while it's wet, you can run the risk of having your paper tear. But if you leave it till it's dry, it'll come off nice like these did. And even though they're a little wrinkly, they're not crazy wrinkly because we did the tape. Thanks for joining me. Next week, we'll have another project where we do some wax resist with the crayon, and we'll use a few different techniques. And then the following week, we'll do a picture where we use the gradient, like the rainbow here in the sky, to make a sunset with hot air balloons in front. So next week will be kind of anything you want to do with the wax resist. I'll talk about some different options. And then the following week, we'll do a landscape with the hot air balloons. So please join us next time. And if you can, you can throw all your supplies back in your bag. Let your paints dry before you close them is a good idea. And then next week, if you want to, you're welcome to have your paper taped down before we get started, because that'll be the first thing we do. Having your paper on a horizontal flat surface is helpful for these projects specifically. For the last one, for the hot air balloon one, vertical would be okay. But anytime we're using salt or anything like that, you probably want it flat. Great, thanks for joining me. I hope you guys like this project. I hope you like next week's too, and we'll come back and have some more fun with me. Thanks a bunch.